All right, so determining race weight, the agenda for today, talking all things weight. Does it matter? What is it? Is there such a thing as race weight? I'm going to ask you to be very actively participating. I have a lot of questions. Do you believe there's a race weight? Have you done this? So highly interactive. Myths versus facts. I want to talk about some of those when it comes to race weight. The tools that we can use to actually measure body composition, my strategy of good, better, and best, and then I'll make sure to leave some time at the end for Q&A. All right, so by a show of hands and/or unmuting, true or false, there is a specific weight at which an athlete will be able to achieve peak performance. Go with yes, no, maybe. the question, there we go. So false, kind of true. False. There is absolutely a correlation between having a lower body weight and endurance performance. You know, we haven't had a lot of athletes winning the major competitions that have higher body fat percentages and lower strength to weight ratios. So there is absolutely a correlation. However, in general, picking a number on the scale without context doesn't ensure results and can often inhibit performance. I loved Matt Fitzgerald's quote, "Body weight is important, but performance is more important." So throughout this day, throughout the discussion today, you'll hear me refer to race weight in that there is an ideal range for performance for your body. There is no one specific race weight for men or for women that is magically going to ensure that your performance, that you're guaranteed a performance, or that for you individually, that you will feel good at that weight, that your training will go well. So race weight, the concept, true. A specific race weight, false. This is a quote from an athlete and good friend of mine that I worked with leading up to, gosh, 2 Olympic trials now. Her name is Kate Grace, the amazing runner in the front there. When we discuss race weight, I'm often cognizant and mindful of the fact that it is a, to use the phrase, trigger topic for a lot of athletes, male and female, that with the assumption that leaner is better. And Kate, when we first started working together, very openly admitted that her weight was a focus and that her goal was to lose as much weight as possible to get to a certain performance marker. And in working together, we really had to come to the realization that thinner isn't necessarily better. And so she wrote a really lengthy blog post about it. I can put the link in the chat towards the end with the Q&A. If you would like to read it, I think it's pretty valuable. But this particular, I was starting a boot camp, and by June I'd be ripped and look the part of an Olympian. It was this focus on aesthetic over substance that almost kept me from being an Olympian, from being a factor, and from being my best. So really at the end of the day, being cognizant and mindful that obsessing over a race weight can do not only more harm than good, but can also keep you from your goals. And so as we're going through this discussion, performance and health first, weight second, particularly. All right, what key considerations should we be looking for when we are talking about an ideal race weight? The goal is to focus on the process of maximizing your fitness through smart training and appropriate nutrition. You'll hear me repeat this Smart training, appropriate nutrition. Some of the building blocks and factors that you want to have incorporated in there: training success. How is your training going? Your daily nutrition. What are you eating on a daily basis? Are you fueling your workouts and recovery properly? Sleep and stress. If your dietary habits and reaching a quote unquote race weight or goal weight is negatively impacting your sleep or adding stress to your life, that is a detrimental factor, and you want to be taking that into account, that that's doing more harm than good. Looking at your past performances. We'll kind of go into this in detail. When have you had your best races? When have you had seasons of your best training without injury, making your biggest strides? What was your weight at that point? We want to look at that factor as well. And then making some calculations: your overall body composition, your overall weight, your strength, your power, speeds, power on the bike, speed and endurance on your swims. So all of these things combined are what's going to get you to your goal weight, not one specific number in general. All right, my favorite, I get this a lot: myths and facts about race weight. So myth number one, I'm sure you've heard these. If you want to leave in the comments which ones you've heard or believed, that'll give me a better idea too later of what to spend more time on. Number one, racing weight is being underweight. The thinner you get, the better. And in this case, the fact there, absolutely untrue. Too thin and your training suffers. If you are not eating properly and fueling properly, if you lose too much weight at once, you won't be sleeping well, your hormonal panel will be off, blood biomarkers will be off, you're not getting those nutrients that you need, you won't be able to train as hard and recover as well. So in the long run, performance is suffering. Number two, muscle just adds bulk. The fact, muscle increases your power to weight ratio. The stronger and leaner that you are, the faster you will be in your run, the stronger and more capable you will be of putting out a higher power output, more watts on your bike, being a more efficient swimmer, recovering faster in your workouts. So being afraid of adding muscle, a lot of endurance athletes are, not a valid reason. And any weight gain that may come from adding muscle to a certain extent will only make you a better triathlete. Myth number three, racing weight is a year-round weight. False. Not true. Racing weight is only sustained for a few weeks. There's a reason that we call it racing weight. There's also a reason that during the off season, we're often encouraged to ease up on the diet a bit, and potentially it's a great time to have your blood work done, get a profile of where you're at. Dieting, quote unquote, dieting all year can be very unhealthy mentally and physically. So that kind of peak goal weight is something that you should only see 2, maybe 3 times a year, depending on your race schedule. Again, we'll go into that in specifics. Number 4, racing weight is achieved by strict dieting. This is the idea that at some point you will just, often I've seen athletes will say, oh, I'm about 4 weeks out. I will, just start cutting calories and, lose those 5 pounds because I think that at X amount of pounds, this is where I'm going to feel good. Your racing weight is where your body settles at the time of peak performance. That's kind of the ruling definition. So you want your body to be comfortable. You want your body point, your racing weight to be set when you are performing at your best, training, sleeping, mentally, emotionally, physically at your healthiest, that is your ideal racing weight. And number 5, achieving my goal race weight ensures a best performance. That's almost like saying that having the perfect bike is going to give me the fastest bike split of the day. Not those two, while it may happen, you may get the fastest bike split of the day, and your bike may play a factor in that. It is not the only determining factor. It is not the only reason, and it most certainly will not ensure that you are the fastest cyclist of the day during that race. The fact is, proper execution of race strategy, so working with your coaches and understanding what the best way to race for you, pacing, the training leading up to that, a race nutrition plan. I can't stress this enough, that you work through. We encourage at least 12 weeks out to be practicing, but having that race nutrition plan in place and following that during your race. And then obviously one of my favorite Meredith Kessler words, gumption. Those 3 things lead to a best performance, but again, don't necessarily ensure a best performance. It's all of these factors combined that will get you to where you want to be. All right, before I start going on the next one, I would love to see, are there any questions at this point? Be nice to talk, kind of cover some things before we start on tools and how to actually assess ideal body composition.
Speaking for myself, the myths always sort of pop in my head. Intellectually, I think most of us know the facts. To some degree, I think this is really an excellent chart of all those, but it's really hard to keep the myths from creeping in and sort of becoming obsessive.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so hard. I think especially as triathletes, we love to control the controllables. And there's so much out of our control on race day, and the nerves that go along with that, and the uncertainty of how that performance will go. By assuming that we can control our weight, and that will in some way help us, and we can kind of take that, like check that box, it's very natural to assume that these myths are in fact facts. I also think, as I can speak from experience, being underweight and trying to race and seeing the consequences, it's almost, you have to experience some of these things before you realize just how incorrect they are. Again, doesn't make it easy. I think by a tool that we have used kind of with nutrition counseling is, it's okay that these thoughts enter your brain. The goal is to see how quickly you can pass those on. So as that thought, like that, we're going to have these thoughts. It's natural. We've seen elite athletes that luckily now I think they're coming in more in kind of varied shapes and sizes. There are different heights, widths, body composition. And so we're getting a better picture, but it's still very easy to flash to that picture of maybe a marathon runner or Olympian that is very lean. So while we can't necessarily control that those thoughts come in, how quickly can I say, acknowledge it? I'm thinking, I'm back to that mind frame of, if I just lost a couple more pounds, I would hit that, I'd be training better or feeling better. But then very quickly saying, you know what, I had this discussion. I've spoken with my coaches. I've seen countless examples, and I've raced myself knowing that there are so many things, so many factors that contribute to success. This is just a tiny portion of one. And then ideally acknowledging it and pushing it along. So I feel, it's a mental mind F, as they say.
Building on the previous question, I'm just curious if there is a rule of thumb, and maybe you're coming to this in the presentation, but again, one of the things I'm sure a lot of people have heard is if you lose I think it's per kilo, then you gain, it's like 3 or 4 seconds per mile, like is as a rule of thumb. Obviously there has to come a point where if you lose too much weight, that would then suffer the other way. So I'm just wondering if there's a rule of thumb around body fat percentage or anything, like where you kind of hit the point of diminishing returns, or even like reversing the gain.
Excellent, excellent question. The research that they have done on elite triathletes, elite endurance athletes, shows that the ideal body composition or body fat percentage for men is between 6 and 11%. And females, it is between 16 and 19%. Now, with those body fat composition, these are elite athletes. These are not everyday athletes like myself and some of us on this call. It's hard to extrapolate data for elite athletes and apply it to non-elite athletes. Genetically, elite athletes are already gifted, and so it's hard and sometimes inaccurate to say that to shoot for a body fat percentage, just like it's hard to shoot for a, I would love to, be able to throw a football like Tom Brady. Is it because he's this strong? If I get this strong, does that mean I'm going to be able to throw the football like him? Not at all. And not necessarily. So taking body weight percentages and from elite gifted athletes and transferring them isn't always, causation and correlation aren't the same. That being said, those are the numbers that they have shown for winners at these various events. Those are the results that they have. Now, a professional female triathlete, Holly Lawrence, was winning at, I think she said she was at around 13% body fat, so under that 16%, but then spent an entire season injured, off the racing list. So she got to a low weight where she was winning, but then paid the consequence later with some very serious health outcomes: lower bone density, stress fractures, hormonal system, endocrine system completely off. So reaching that number may not actually benefit you in the long run. It could derail your career or your passion as a triathlete. Men, if your body fat percentage gets too low, testosterone can drop. And in that case, then that affects recovery, that affects your ability to put on muscle, that affects your endocrine and hormonal system. So seeing those numbers, we can be mindful of them, but not always the best idea to shoot for that goal, because there's so much context around those numbers. But an excellent—
Elizabeth,
yes.
could you share some context around perhaps athletes that are on the other end of the spectrum? So they're clearly like way overweight based on whatever markers, and perhaps is there like an interim, like a healthy weight to target before going to race weight? I'd be curious for your thoughts up there.
Great point. So we'll do a little measurement or a specific weight to height, or weight to inches ratio next. But if you are over, for men, over 28% body fat, and women over 32% body fat, is when we see performance in the decline or in the not ideal weight. Prerequisite with that is body fat percentage isn't always, depending on how you're measuring it, which we'll get into detail, those factors could be off. I think I like to tell my athletes, we know for our body, if we are not at our best, if we are unhealthy. And I think if you're making that assessment and you know, I could lose, I kind of use the marker 15 pounds or more. And again, this is my personal experience with endurance athletes. If they're at a point where they say, I've been 15 to 20 pounds leaner, or, you know I could lose 15 or more pounds, that to me is always a sign where we should discuss race weight and body composition. That's a healthy kind of benchmark. And so getting to between 10 pounds or so over your ideal weight or goal weight, or a weight that you've been at before and trained really well, and then cutting that back even 5 more pounds. Again, pounds, number on a scale. I don't like to use these, but they're helpful to athletes. So slowly dialing back from a 15 pound, 10 pound, 5 pound weight benchmarker is about what's right for you and where you should be looking at making body composition changes to really see performance benefits. The point I like to make here when I say I hate giving athletes specific numbers, telling you, oh, if you're 15 pounds overweight, that's a good spot to start. Well, that might be a good spot to start for a 175, 190 pound athlete, 200 pound athlete. It would be a horrible place to start for a 105 pound athlete. So, and asking them to lose 10 pounds or 15 pounds. So these numbers are meaningful in the greater context, meaningless in the very specific, if you're looking at how much weight are you looking in the size of your frame and age and all of those kinds of other factors. Good questions. Love it. All right. So, how to determine your race weight? A couple factors here to kind of break down. The number one, and I put this because it's such an individualized number, is past performance. When in your, and if you're new to triathlon, which many people are, this becomes a little bit vague, but you can look at when in your life you have felt at your best. But for today's discussion, past performance. At what weight were you training well, recovering well, racing well, sleeping well, mentally well, and blood? I'm always going to say this, blood biomarkers, when were those at optimal as well? Then we look at men and women. So the standard weight, goal weight, if you will, for men is 2.1 to 2.3 pounds per inch. Females is 1.8 to 2.0 pounds per inch. And that's—
You specify for inch, what inches in what?
Oh, inches in height, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, not waist circumference, not shoe size, inches in height. I can speak again from experience as a 5'10" female at kind of the peak of what I would say was my most competitive racing and also my most unhealthy. I think body fat percentage was about not quite 14, and weight, gosh, what did I weigh at that point? 118 pounds. Incredibly unhealthy, not my best performance. Hair loss, sleep troubles, stress fractures. So even being on the low side of some of this might not be optimal for you, just like being on the higher side might not be optimal. So it's very athlete and individually dependent, but this is a good baseline to start with. Other components that I always want to mention when we're looking at race day and race weight. Optimal hydration and optimal kind of carb loading. When on race day, ideally, we are slightly over our, we have consumed more, we have carb loaded, and we know that carbohydrates will retain water, so we will be a little bit heavier. Same thing with optimal hydration. If our bodies are properly hydrated, properly fueled, if we thought our race goal weight was, let's say, 130 pounds, we might come into the race at 135, and that is perfectly okay because we have properly carb loaded, properly hydrated. We are ready for a full day of half Ironman racing. So hitting that number can change based on being properly fueled and hydrated for your day. I want to point out, there are race weight calculators. The formula, there's kind of 3 formulas that different race weight calculators use. It's easy to Google. You will most likely get a range if you test all 3. I didn't put links in specifically because I don't like race weight calculators. They don't take into effect or your individual body composition. It's a numeric formula, and while it's kind of nice to get an idea, it's not accurate in all cases, and in some cases can be highly inaccurate. So if you would like to go on and Google race weight calculators, they're there. Potentially, I think if you're in that category that Jonathan spoke of earlier, where you could have a more optimal body composition, those can be useful tools just to kind of set potential benchmark. I think they're very harmful if you are already in an ideal weight, kind of an ideal weight situation, and you use those to justify getting even leaner. So be mindful. They're there. You can look at them for reference. I don't recommend all of them. All right.
There's a question that came in, Elizabeth. So, if you have a big jump in terms of getting to your goal number, what are your recommendations on like setting interim goals to get to sort of that ultimate goal?
Great. So you should be at your goal at about, you don't want to be dieting, which I have in a later slide, that like 8 weeks or so before your race. So you want to be at that goal weight per se, 6 to 8 weeks or very close to it. So again, your goal weight is 150 pounds. If you're sitting at about 155, anywhere between 150 and 155 in those 6 to 8 weeks before, you're in the right spot. So counting backwards, 16 or so weeks, I think, again, depending on how much weight you have to lose, and setting very healthy, realistic weight loss expectations. Again, depending on how much weight you have to lose, the more weight you have to lose, the more you can look at like a weekly benchmark. So anywhere from 1 to 3 pounds, depending on how much weight you have to lose, and if you are losing it at a healthy interval and in a healthy way.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And just to chime in here on how this works in the app. So there's a section under your settings where you can always adjust your race weight, or your goal weight, I should say. And weekly, we compare your goal weight to your current weight. And if it's below your current weight, then we put you on a sort of a weight loss or fat loss program. And you'll notice when you first signed up, there's 3 kind of aggressiveness settings: standard, moderate, and aggressive. And that dictates to what Elizabeth was saying, where within the 1 to 3 pound range a week we'll be targeting for you to kind of lose each week. And so another factor to consider, where a lot of athletes have come to us with, is if they're going through a heavy training block, we always ask to think about, well, what is your overall primary goal? Is it weight loss or performance? In the case of performance, then we may suggest taking a step back and thinking about 2 or 3 week blocks of kind of focusing on weight loss and then shifting back to performance and going on a maintenance goal, where you can do is just update your goal weight. Elizabeth, can you speak to that a bit, of how you would think through managing that, or how athletes should self-assess?
Yes. So when you are looking at, I think the natural instinct when it comes to losing weight is, I just want to get in there, lose the weight fast, make it easy, make it simple. And so you automatically will put yourself or set your mind up for drastic or rapid weight loss. The problem with that becomes, especially for females, is that your body doesn't always respond the way that you would want it to with drastic weight loss. So you really want to take a more long-term approach. That's why I say pull out the calendar, take a look at what you have coming up, speak with your coach about training, and be able to look at what a healthy, but in some cases aggressive, I don't mind saying it, aggressive weight loss strategy or body composition strategy might be. And I do speak to this in the end, making sure that there are ways to properly get to your race weight. Underfueling drastic weight loss isn't one of them. So utilizing the app in a smart way of setting realistic goals throughout, and either speaking with one of us, monitoring hunger, monitoring training and sleep, all of those things are important for healthy, progressive weight loss. All right. So how to actually assess body composition. I did the gold, silver, bronze, because there's, along with my good, better, best, the best way, most reliable, most accurate, again, we'll go into these in detail, DEXA. Next, kind of underlying that, you have the underwater weighing, or the BOD pod. Below that, our bronze level is a Skinfold. And then well below that, but I'm still giving honorable mention because it's a tool that a lot of people have and it can be used in some ways, are the bio scales. So the bioelectric scales that many people have at home. So as you can see to the left, this is if you haven't had a DEXA scan, we are looking at fat and muscle tissue in the red, bones. Again, you get a lot more information from a DEXA scan, which is why the Fuelin team highly recommends them, not just to reach race weight, but for other long-term health and longevity, bone density, muscle, body fat, all of those components combined. All right.
Was that your DEXA scan, Elizabeth?
No, nope.
Okay. I saw a sample one.
Just a sample. It's about time. It's been, ideally you get one every 2 years. And I haven't had a DEXA scan in probably 4 now. So I'll blame it on COVID. Blame everything on COVID. But really it's just me being lazy and scheduling them and getting into take one. All right, so the DEXA, the gold standard, high degree of precision and accuracy. The DEXA scan, if you have, okay, let's do a show of hands. How many people have had a DEXA scan? Yeah. All right, I like it. Good bunch. Well worth your time. Well worth the money. DEXA scans measure bone, so it measures the mineral content of your bones. It can help calculate your osteoporosis risk. and assessment of that risk compares you to, there are two scores, a T-score and a Z-score. T-score looks at your comparison to the average 30-year-old male or female. That's about when peak bone density is. The Z-score actually looks at your comparison to other males or females in your age group. Best when tracked over time. The benefit of having multiple is because you can see, am I actually losing bone density? It's one thing to get a reading and say, oh, I'm at 25% bone density for my age. Well, if you haven't ever had one before, we don't know if you were ever at 100% of bone density. You may have had lower bone density your entire life. So seeing these results can sometimes raise alarm bells, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you've lost a significant amount. It's a benchmark for where you are at that time. What helps by having multiple DEXA scans done is we can see, oh, 2 years ago, my bone density was this. 8 years ago, my bone density was that. So valuable tool, best when done and tracked over time. DEXA scans also look at fat mass and lean muscle mass. Important, obviously, for body composition. As we're speaking about reaching an ideal race weight, as we are looking at making proper nutritional choices, fat mass and lean muscle mass are important. It's also, I like it because it gives us a tool, a very measurable tool for where you're at and can be very encouraging to make progress. DEXA scans also look at visceral fat as in the long term. So visceral fat is the fat around your organs, and this is the best predictor of chronic disease. Very, very important for long-term health and longevity. I love you as athletes, and I hope that you get to do triathlon for as long as possible, but I love you more as humans and want you to, be living a long and healthy life. So that visceral fat measurement is very helpful in that. Another component of DEXA scans that we don't always consider, but can be very useful, is injury recovery. DEXA scans look and will do a left and right side comparison. They will do muscle symmetry and growth, looking at bone density. So being able to see, oh, I'm weaker. I personally am weaker on my right side. That's where all of my injuries happen. And being able to see, oh, I have a lower muscle mass on this side. I have a lower bone density. I'm accumulating more fat here or there, can be helpful in understanding potentially where injuries come from. It's also helpful in looking at if you are healing and building muscle or helping bone density, strengthening activities if you're getting better from an injury also. So a very useful tool in all aspects, and why it's my favorite. It is cost inhibitive and time inhibitive. So as we're looking at some of these other options, DEXA scans are pricey. So something to take into consideration. The silver level, the water weighing, or the BOD pod. These also have a high degree of precision and accuracy. They're about a 2 to 3% margin of error, whereas the DEXA scan is under 1%. At this point, still a 2 to 3% margin of error is very, very good. The problem with water weighing and BOD pods, so hard to find, so access is limited, and they are quite pricey. Both of these will do bone measurements, so measure bone density, osteoporosis, risk assessment. To determine muscle mass, there are extra calculations required, and it doesn't measure visceral fat. Just an FYI. For some people, obviously not for triathletes, we swim, but being underwater is very uncomfortable for a lot of people. So that's a reason that sometimes people stay away from the water weighing. Cons, cost, availability, and then the software machine. There are, if the test isn't performed, and you'll see these with the rest of the silver and the honorable mention, software updates or user error or machine error. Different machines can give you different results. So accurate if you use the same person to do the test in the same facility with the same software at the same time, you know, in your training cycle and on the same machine. So a lot of variables, but again, the test itself is accurate. All right, Skinfold. I want to make sure to leave time for questions. Skinfold. This is where they use the calipers and will measure 3 to 7, we call them pinch points, around your body. Measuring subcutaneous fat used to predict overall body fat percentage. Skinfolds don't measure bone density. Benefits of Skinfold: most gyms, the trainers there will perform them either low cost or free. They are, I would say, one of the easiest ways to, and least obtrusive, least expensive ways to kind of measure that body fat percentage. A great place to start. If you're wondering, am I close? Where's my body fat percentage at? Financially, you don't want to go all in on the DEXA. This is at least a good starting point. And then the last one are the bioscales. A very low degree of precision and accuracy. The benefit that I see of these, though, is kind of like with any tool. If you have a bioscale and you measure and it says you have 30% body fat, if you use that same scale again in 4 weeks and it says you have 28% body fat, you know you've lost some. We don't know if you actually started at 30%, and we don't know if you're actually at 28%, but we do know that your body composition is better. So at the very least, it's a tool in helping you see progress. It doesn't measure bone density. It's a very simple body fat percentage measurement. The things with the bioscales, though, your hydration status can drastically affect the outcome. The fact if you had a hard training session and inflammation is high and your body is retaining water, that can affect it. Creatine consumption can also affect if you're in a loading phase. So if you're not doing the standard 5 grams a day, like we recommend, if you are loading for 2 weeks, that can also affect the outcome on a bioscale.
And a key thing with all of these measurements, I just want to chime in and highlight, is the consistency of when you're measuring. And so when in the app, when we ask for a weigh-in every Monday and Friday, you know, the goal is you do that first thing in the morning after going to relieving yourself, so that you're comparing apples to apples. And that goes for all of these measurement tools. And so if you're doing a DEXA, try to control and keep consistent, you know, the time of your appointment, which machine you're using, what did you do the night before? That way it's a accurate measurement one over the other. And I guess the other thing to point out is you don't want to compare one method with another. So if you're using like the bioscale or let's say the BOD POD, you know, comparing don't do the BOD POD once and then the DEXA next and then something else after, and try to correlate those measurements, as they won't necessarily be accurate since each machine has a different level of kind of calibration.
Perfect.
And then maybe very honorable mention is the string. You want to talk about that Scott's like low cost measurement tool?
So Scott likes to say at the end, you know, waist circumference is a kind of determinant and marker for overall health. So at the very least, using a string, measuring waist circumference, taking that string, putting it on, you know, the tape measure, if you will, getting your waist circumference, getting your height, and putting that formula into a body, you know, body fat percentage. it's at the very least a simple tool for understanding kind of where you're at. All right, so before we get to the questions, I have some do's and don'ts to kind of wrap up the how to get to your healthy weight, goal weight, race weight in a safe way. So let's cover the don'ts. Don't drop to too low calorie. Don't crash diet. Don't cut out carbohydrates. Don't make fat loss the priority in your training. So I see a lot of athletes will go, oh, well, you know, it's a zone 3-4 day, but if I go into this fasted, I'll lose more fat, missing the entire point of your training session. And don't try to cut weight too close to your A race. So the important things, do focus on protein consumption. When you are trying to change body composition, yet still maintain and build muscle, that 1.6 to 2.4 grams per kilogram, grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. The app, if we have you on, reaching your goal weight, we have that factored in, but making sure that you are not dropping to low protein, that you're consuming enough protein. Properly fueling around your training sessions. That is key. Even with a weight loss goal, you still want to always be making sure that you're fueling your sessions properly and refueling properly. Because if you don't, that is going to impact your training, impact your recovery, potentially set you up for injury and lowered immune function. And then you also want to make, I like to say this, make strength training a priority. Strength training helps with body composition. It also helps with bone density. Can't say this enough, as a woman getting older, bone density is important. We want to be able to run strong. We want to be able to stand up straight. So strength training will have an impact on your overall body composition, but also on bone density. All right, leave you with those. Now, time for questions. Love. What about goal weight and race weight did we not cover? Or would you like to cover in more detail? Okay. There's room, there's time. Yes.
I have maybe less of a question and more of a just thanks for doing this. I think this was actually a really good way to look at this. And it's a very challenging topic just because there's so much marketing hype and so much BS out there. So thanks for constructing it in this way. I think that is super, super helpful. Like if you just follow this, you're going to
I appreciate that very much. It is a very hard topic to discuss. To appreciate different body shapes and sizes, to appreciate all the nuances with weight.
Gives you really everything you need to know to kind of start on the journey of getting to where you need to be.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. And I agree. That's the audio clip of the day, I think, Scott. Thank you. All right.
There's a question here from Trish. How do you adjust for older female athletes? So personally, older times are not even close to current fitness. Should I still shoot for that weight?
Great question. So in general, Rich Roll did an excellent post on his birthday about comparing our metrics to our younger selves, and the fact that we are different athletes at different stages of our lives. And this is why I say that race weight and goal weight is so nuanced. As we age, especially as females, our body composition changes, our weight changes. Thank you, hormones. Thank you, menopause. We start to lose muscle mass over time. That's sarcopenia, which is why strength training is so important, especially for females as we age. Setting those parameters can change and should change with different stages of our lives. There is more, I would say, wiggle room, more flexibility in hitting those exact percentage numbers as we get older. So the cushion for female athletes, I would say 60 and above. Again, a lot of this depends on your athletic history. If you are new, if you've been an athlete your entire life, your body composition and muscular structure is different than if you started triathlon at 55. But you can allow a cushion of 4% or so. So if in your younger years, we're sitting at about 18%, 22 to 24% may be ideal and may be the most attainable at the age that you are now. So weight loss does get harder as we get older. Hormonally, we're more sensitive. It's somewhat more difficult to put on muscle. So allowing a cushion of about 4% from where maybe you were at your lowest and healthiest is about a good benchmark. Good question. I think at the end of the day, there are so many other important factors in having a successful race. Knowing that you're in an ideal range for your body shape, size, your personal history, health history, that peace of mind is so much more important than a specific number, and believing that that's going to have a larger effect on your race. If anything, it'll have more of an effect on your training for the months leading up to your race than it will on your actual race day. There's my closing 2 cents. Yes, Scott.
A quick one. Back to optimal carbo loading prior. I think in the slide it talked about 8 grams per kilogram, 24 to 48 hours.
Yes.
Can you speak to that a little bit? Or is that just sort of kind of what you should shoot for?
Yes, that is the general, that research has shown that is the most effective combination, if you will, of carbohydrate consumption in the 24 to 48 hours. That may or may not be ideal for you. And this is why we stress doing carbohydrate tests and understanding, kind of training your gut to process and absorb carbohydrates. Many athletes won't get to that 8 grams. That's uncomfortable for them. So in your either practice sessions, your long Saturday brick sessions leading up to, or in any kind of B or C races that you have throughout the year, starting at 5 to 6 grams per kilogram and building up to that 8 is where you'd like to be. It's not again, I've had athletes that feel horrible at 8 grams per kilogram, and I've had athletes that feel horrible at 5. So very personal, but shooting for that higher number and not exceeding it is where you want to be. That's the sweet spot.
And we factor that into your plans. And so you'll notice your green days, those are really they're primarily your carb loading days, especially leading up into a race or leading up into a big session on, let's say on a Saturday. Typically you might have a 4-hour bike session. And if it's a higher intensity, you'll notice your day before is green. And that's what we're doing, is kind of loading you up.
Yeah, I just looked at that 8 grams, did the math, and that's a lot of food.
It is.
Yeah.
And here's some tips for that. I was just speaking with an athlete. She's was running Boston, and she did not practice her race day and pre-race nutrition. And so she said, how am I going to get these in? And I said, well, use the biggest bang for your buck carbohydrates, a bagel, lentils are very carbohydrate dense. Grains, it doesn't, there are ways to increase carbohydrate consumption without necessarily adding large amounts of bulk. And, practicing that also. So it's like being strategic about the carbohydrates that you choose and where you can add those in. I think it's very easy to get carbohydrates into a smoothie, for example, when you can blend in a banana, either oats or oat flour, maybe potentially adding in some blueberries, a protein powder. There's some carbohydrates in that. So it's finding ways to add fuel without adding bulk can help with that also. It doesn't mean you just have to sit and try to get 400 grams of carbohydrates from pasta and Cheerios and whatever else it may be. Like there are good ways and better ways to do it.
All right, well, thank you, Elizabeth. We'll just close out